At the age of 7, I was both fortunate and unfortunate in that I inherited a tackle box from my grandfather, something as ordinary as a tackle box. In that tackle box were all sorts of treasures, things that I decided to explore and learn about in the coming 10 years or so. During that time, I traveled around southwestern Ontario, learning more about fish and doing so through fishing, and quickly decided that this is something that the more time I spent on the water, the more and more I learned. At the same time, I realized there's more and more I didn't know. And essentially, that set me down a path towards wanting to study fish for a living. And so that brings me before you today as an academic, as a fishery scientist. And so certainly I study fish, and when I started down my university training career, that was really the focus. But the longer I've spent studying fish, I've also realized it's equally important to study the people. So these are the individuals that interact with fish on a day-to-day basis. It may be some of you in terms of eating fish on a plate or viewing fish while they're spawning. You may be a scuba diver, or you may be a recreational fisher. Today I'm going to ponder the question as to whether or not we should give every kid a fishing rod. I'm all about connections, and I'm particularly concerned about ensuring that our youth become connected with nature, become connected with aquatic systems. We need those connections if we want people to take care of them. When I went down this path, it certainly made my parents think about whether or not this was maybe the best career path. Although I think I received a lot of confirmation from my parents that this was appropriate when Danny Brower, a professional fishing personality, ended up on the cover of the Wheaties box. My dad was a big sports fan, so nothing more than that could have solidified that this was an appropriate career choice, something worth studying. So being an academic that studies fish and studies recreational fishing means that there's certainly some benefits that come with that. The outdoors is my laboratory, okay? And my tools are things like fishing rods and fishing lures, and with that comes a unique opportunity. I'm one of the few people that can go out, buy fishing lures, and actually hand the receipts in and say, will you pay me back for this? And it usually works, except that every once in a while I'll purchase things called wiggle warts or woolly buggers, and it come back with some interesting queries from the accounting folks. What I want to talk about, though, again, is really get into recreational fishing, a little bit about it, why people do it, the benefits of doing so. When you think of fishing, this is probably what you think about. A nice, warm summer's day, you've got your fishing rod in hand, but I'll remind you that here in North Temperate North America, we have this thing called winter, and certainly people do fish all year round. Fishing is not restricted to North America or the developed world. This is in the Zambezi River in Africa, and this is an angler that's gone after and captured a tigerfish. Okay? Same thing in the oceans. This is known as a dolphin fish, or you might know it as mahi-mahi. This is a fish that's commonly caught by anglers in the marine realm. Around the world, if we collate the statistics that we have, we estimate that 10.5% of the global population participate in fishing on a regular basis, including some of the folks that you see on the screen here. Okay? In addition, if you take just in the United States, the number of people that fish at least once in their life, it's a resounding 88% try at least once in their life. If you count the number of fish, this is I guess more of an estimate than a count, that those individuals catch on an annual basis, 47 billion is their estimate of the number of individual fish that anglers catch. Okay? Now, this is a photograph from the turn of the century, and it's clearly evident that they're harvesting fish, and this is very typical back in the day. Today, we estimate that globally, only 37% of the fish that are caught by rod and reel are actually harvested. which is quite remarkable. In about the 1970s, a movement took over called catch and release, and people started returning a lot more of the catch to the water to be there to reproduce, support future populations, and from an angler's perspective, maybe to be there to be caught again when they're a little bit bigger. That means that 63% of the fish are released. Okay? That's a lot of fish. It depends on the species. Something like walleye, very tasty, fewer fish get released. Something like muskellunge or bonefish, really specialized fisheries, that number's closer to 99%. Okay? So a lot of these fish are getting released. Not all the fish make it, the fish that are released. The mortality rates that have been estimated for a variety of different species are quite varied, everywhere between 0 and 90%, okay, all over the map. The things that drive whether a fish is going to survive or perish are related to things like environmental conditions, temperature, the depth at which a fish is captured, biotic factors, so things about the animal, maybe its reproductive state or size, and then things related to the angler's behavior, so maybe their gear choice or how they handle that fish once it's been caught. There are a number of things that people can do when they're fishing or once they've caught a fish to ensure that those fish are more likely to survive. One of the things that we know is that the biggest driver of fish survival is where the hook is located. And obviously fish that are hooked in the throat don't do as well as fish that are hooked more superficially. And so on the screen here, you can see something called a circle hook, which is a bit different than what you might think of a typical hook, which might be more of a J shape. And these circle hooks are really good at avoiding deep hooking and hooking the fish quite shallowly in the lip region. So something as simple as using this kind of hook can reduce mortality rates by 50%. When you have a fish that's deeply hooked, and in the radiograph you can see a hook in the gullet, we figured out that if you cut the line and let that fish go, 12.5% of the fish will die. However, if you work really hard, and even if you're careful at doing it with pliers to get that hook out, then we know that it's closer to 45% of those fish, but 44% of those fish perish. So we now know that it's better to cut the line, let the fish swim away. We also know that how an angler handles a fish is quite important. So from work that we've done in the Bahamas on bonefish, we know that when a fish is exposed to air and handled for a long enough period to the point where it loses equilibrium, in other words, it's on its back, unable to right itself, even if you help that fish to the point where it swims away, we see 6 times higher, or 6 times more predation. And you can see that's an example of a bonefish that's had its tail removed by a shark. That those fish are 6 times more likely to perish in a catch and release angling event. However, there's good news. There's things we can do to turn things around. Taking that same bonefish that's pooped out, putting him in a recovery bag, and giving him 15 minutes to recover, we can address the behavioral impairments. We can get it to the point where that fish is vigorous again, such that it can swim away and avoid predators. All of this information gets incorporated into something we call codes of practice, or things that anglers can do. They're mostly voluntary. We're trying to modify their behavior so that the outcome is better for the fish. So what I've done is just give you a bit of background on fish and sort of the process of catching them and some of the science behind ensuring that fish that are caught and released, that those fish have a good chance of making it, of surviving. I want to next get into the benefits. We'll start off with the monetary ones, although I don't think they're the most important. In the marine realm alone, estimated at $40 billion a year in expenditures, both direct and indirect related to recreational angling, and just shy of 1 million jobs. That's the marine realm alone. Here in Canada, over $8 billion a year goes into the economy from recreational fishing from coast to coast. A single bonefish in the Florida Keys is estimated to generate $75,000 over the course of its life, okay? And if you're sitting there thinking about how is that possible, think about the number of trips that people would take going down, spending money on things like fuel, accommodation, and certainly beer when you're going fishing. So through time, and because I told you earlier that 99% or so of these fish are released, they're able to accrue a value of as much as $75,000 over their lifetime. We also are seeing recreational fisheries appear in emerging economies. This is in the Western Ghats region of India, where there's a mahseer fishery, and you can see a mahseer in that photo, where anglers go, they fish with local guides, you stay in local accommodation, so you're putting money into local economy. And we're also seeing commercial fisheries in transition. This is in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, where there's been a long history of having a commercial fishery for bluefin tuna. More recently, those same commercial fishers have traded in their commercial fishing gear for recreational fishing gear because it's more profitable, okay? They're allowed to go out, take people out day after day after day, and generate more income. And we're seeing this increasingly around the world. Now we're getting into the important things, social bonding, okay? Whether it be with family or friends, reduce stress and negative emotions. There's research been done by psychologists and social scientists that show that folks that engage in fishing on a regular basis have reduced negative emotions. We also see a reduction in crime propensity among young people, and you might be familiar with hooked on fishing, not drugs. And then there's getting anglers actually engaged in doing something, giving back. In this case, photos of anglers engaged in stream restoration, trying to help bring stream environments back to a more pristine state. Anglers participate in science. They help generate data. In Australia, there's been over 1.1 million fish tagged by recreational fishers, providing important information on the spatial ecology and survival rates of fish. That would be very expensive for governments to go out and do. And a lot of these recreational fish are best captured by rod and reel. And then there's actually engaging the community in your research on a day-to-day basis. This is Sean Landsman in the back of the boat, one of my grad students from a couple of years back, and he worked with Muskies Canada, a local group, and every day he went out in the field, he had a different member of that angling club in his boat helping him with his data collection. There's not a better way to become connected with the natural world and science. Recreational anglers also help to finance a lot of conservation activities through license sales, and a lot of those funds actually go to support biodiversity and other conservation initiatives that are independent of benefiting any game fish or sport fish populations. And then finally, we know that children that fish on a regular basis score much higher on tests related to environment and wildlife knowledge. It's really about making connections, giving away for people, providing opportunity for people to connect with the natural world. In my instance, as I mentioned, I'm very interested in fish and in the aquatic realm, and modifying their behavior such that when it comes time to dispose of the oil that they've taken out of their car or to vote, that they make the right decision. There's some things right now that concern me, however. In 1950, 30% of the global population lived in rural environments, okay? More inherently connected to nature. Now we've got, by 2030, estimate is that 70% of the global population will live in urban centers. In 1975, the average age of an angler in Canada was 41, and now we've got people with white hair like that. I can say that because that's my dad. Average age now, 50, okay? We're not recruiting new anglers. 44 hours per week, that's the amount of time the average North American child spends in front of electronics. Okay, that's problematic. And yes, I know there are fishing video games, but that doesn't count, okay? Doesn't count. At the end of the day, vast number of people within our society, lack connections to fish and aquatic ecosystems. How do we get people to care? I don't want to have to live in a paved world where the only open water I have is down a manhole. I want to live in a world where we have people that are connected to their environment, that are connected to water, and that modify their behavior accordingly. So should every child be given a fishing rod? In my mind, yes. I've done that with my own son, who you can see in this photograph here. It's not just about the pastime, the leisure activity. It's about connecting with family. But I would argue more importantly, it's about connecting with the environment, something with which we all need to do a better job of. So even if it's not a fishing rod, I would suggest a tackle box because, as I told you earlier, that's what worked for me. Thank you.